So this is our second episode from Jordan. In the last episode we explored Aqaba and Wadi Rum, and we were just on our way to here. And this is Petra. But while this is the most famous part of it, this is actually only a small fraction of what's there. If it looks familiar, Indiana Jones, Last Crusade. No, I'm not going to play the clip, I don't want a channel strike. This is where the majority of people have seen this, and it's kind of nuts how just two feature films, Indiana Jones and Lawrence of Arabia, account for an impossibly high percentage of the country's tourist influx. Now, don't get me wrong, Jordan has set itself up really well for tourists. We mentioned last time that there's an impressive level of English from pretty much everyone we encountered. We also mentioned the Jordan Pass, which I think needs a quick explanation. So if you're visiting Jordan, there's a visa fee of 40 JD. However, as a form of alternative, and they really make this the most attractive option, there's also a thing called the Jordan Pass. Basically, it pays your visa fee and entrance to pretty much every major historical or cultural site in the country. So there are 3 price bands, but it literally just boils down to how many days we'd like at Petra, 1, 2 or 3. And just bear in mind, by the way, that a face value ticket at the gate of Petra will set you back about 50 JD. So yeah, you can see why the Jordan Pass is pretty much set up to be a no-brainer. So where we left off last time, we were driving from Wadi Rum in the taxi with Youssef. Now, this won't be the last time I sing his praises, but he was an absolute legend. We booked taxi connections between all our major stopping points, and I'll be honest, a little bit of bad experience with taxis in other countries had me a bit on edge. We were completely dependent on these journeys to link everything up, but not only was Youssef entirely trustworthy and utterly reliable, but he was just really warm and friendly and very easygoing, and he really seemed to care about us having a good time. I cannot recommend him highly enough. He kind of became the Obi-Wan to our Han, Luke and Leia, respectively. So that was a big weight off. As we drove, the weather was not too great. The horizon soon faded into a grey obscurity like a PlayStation 1 game with a poor draw distance. It was also getting flatter. Now and then the sand whipped up by the wind would bring the visibility down even more. The highways are pretty wide. This is one of the main arteries north to south, and without trains this is pretty much the only way to get anything moved around in Jordan. So after about a couple of hours of driving we got out here. The town perched at the doorstep of Petra is called Wadi Musa. There's more buildings here than I expected, but with the weather due to get worse in the afternoon we were in too much of a hurry to scout around for a better choice of lunch, so we quickly plonked down in here. The food felt cheap, but it was cheap. That was kind of the plan. It was alright. We then quickly zipped around the museum, which is actually pretty great. It's a new addition to the site, and it's a pretty good primer. I mean, it's no secret I'm a massive history dork, but even though I thought I was all caught up with Petra, there's actually a lot here to help you understand what you're seeing. So we've been dodging the question for a while now, but I think we need a quick explainer. What actually is Petra? Okay, well, Petra is a huge site with remains from many different civilizations. There are chunks that are more famous than others. Some of the most famous and the earliest are from a culture called the Nabateans. Now, if you've never heard of the Nabateans, you're definitely in good company. They're responsible for these insane rock-carved tombs in the side of the Red Cliffs. However, Petra doesn't stop with these. The Nabateans also left behind some massive ruined temples, and if that wasn't enough, there's also some Roman layers that they added to the site, and there's even some Byzantine churches on the hillside as well. So wary of being caught up by bad weather, we started off down the trail, which starts at this remarkably large visitor centre, and then had to double back because you can't just present your Jordan Pass at the gate, you actually have to get a ticket from the ticket office. This was indicated in approximately 0 places, but never mind. Take 2. We were walking pretty briskly to get to the good stuff, but we were already filling spots of rain. I was aware that we were barely taking in some of the stuff we were passing, but there had been hints that the site might even close. Some of the vendors were hurrying us along, so we kept hurrying. You eventually find yourself at the start of the Seek, which is a narrow canyon of deep red stone. It was very beautiful. Even if this canyon didn't lead to Petra, it still would have been worth making the trip, but it was also sparing us from the winds, and only a few spots of rain were making it through. The very slight silver lining was because of the weather, there weren't a lot of people around. This is probably as quiet as it gets in the daytime, and most other days this site would be packed. The most dramatic reveal comes at the end when the canyon opens out to reveal this. This is the treasury, so named because of the urn at the top, but paradoxically the treasury contains no treasure and quite possibly never did. And yes, this is the Indiana Jones spot. It feels insulting just referencing an old film where it appeared for like little under 5 minutes. It's so much more than that. It was built as an Nabatean tomb, and a glance inside reveals a much more austere interior. It would almost be bare stone were it not for the exquisite texture of the rock itself. But that's getting ahead. You really need to take some time just to enjoy the exterior, and it does merit a good long pause to take it in. But for us, there was something weird going on. There were vendors shouting and there's lots of stuff going on, and they were telling us to go back. It was all a bit unclear. These weren't like official staff, or at least they didn't look like it. But there were 3 police cars pulled out just by the treasury, so we couldn't just do whatever. But this was only the first step of Petra, and I couldn't bear just doubling back now. So we sort of loitered to wait and see, and finally a modest-sized group of people just started walking, ignoring the vendors, and I decided this was the best time, and look, hey, we could all just get in trouble together. That seemed like the best plan. So we marched on, and I didn't hear any yelling behind me. I was just desperate to get a little further in. The winds were pretty punishing, even though the rain hadn't got going in earnest. So yeah, it wasn't exactly the day I'd hoped for. But at the time, I was just focused on being able to film just a little bit more, just get us another 20 yards in, and then another. So the treasure is one of the more memorable rock cut tombs, but the caves and rock cuttings are far too numerous to count. There are so many. We passed the amphitheatre on our left. That was a milestone. I really wanted to catch this. However huge it might look on camera, it's bigger. It could seat about 8,500, and unlike pretty much all the surviving theatres we have from the ancient world, this one wasn't constructed, it was carved, just cut clean from the sheer rock. The valley then opens up and you get to see the real size of the place. It was just on a completely different scale than I pictured, and while we kept getting diverted from certain places by less than particularly trustworthy looking people, yeah, I don't really know what constitutes a Petra staff member, but a few logo polo shirts wouldn't go amiss. We really didn't know whether to trust the people who were giving us instructions, so it was all a bit sketchy, but as long as we weren't being forcibly injected and I could keep filming, I was happier. Anyway, keeping the camera still in the high winds was still proving very difficult. I got a chance to film the ruined Byzantine church there, which most of you probably don't care about, so I'll just store that footage away for another time. There's the Temple of the Winged Lions, though no winged lions are in situ, so I don't know how you feel about that. Hyundai were very keen to get their logo on this. Not exactly sure how they helped out or why they think that contributing to an archaeological project is going to compel people to dash out to buy a boxy mid-range town car, but okay, knock yourself out, Hyundai. There wasn't really anywhere else we could go that we hadn't been ushered away from. We stopped in the relative shelter of the Egyptian church, but even out of the main onslaught of the wind, we were still getting pelted with sand. By now, a few visitors we'd encountered had passed on to us that the park was being closed due to a risk of flash flooding. Side note here, this is a very real threat. It was likely a catastrophic flash flood sometime in the 4th or 5th centuries that hastened Petra's decline. Spoiler alert.
Spoilers from history.
Those canyons we walked through, well, after a rockfall, they can easily get blocked and build up a big reservoir of water, and then if that dam breaks, you get water reaching pretty terrifying speed and intensity. Just in 2018, 12 people were killed by a sudden flash flood at Petra, so yeah, nowadays they really don't want to take any chances. Worse yet, there was also a rumour that the park would stay closed tomorrow. So I took a few more wide shots and looked forlornly at what might be our last chance to see the site. I mean, we hadn't got to see the Temple of Duchères or the Great Temple up close. We hadn't been up to the royal tombs either, but I consoled myself that at least I'd got in. I'd got around, I'd seen most of it, just not in the way I would have hoped. There's sort of an exit gate and a road out of the valley to the north. They were apparently busing people back to the entrance, so we joined the crowd and huddled under an inadequate shelter. It actually started to properly rain now. Some trucks appeared and dropped some steps at the back with a bang. It was kind of like something out of a Call of Duty cinematic, but without getting shot in the head at the end. We bounced off with the wind tearing in the sides. The views were incredible, but we were too tightly packed to get any good shots. Back in Wadi Musa and now getting completely drenched, we dashed to the nearest restaurant that looked even vaguely nicer and ended up in here. A little bit overpriced, but not enough to get really upset. A nice slow Turkish coffee, a few baklava, and just time to breathe. We were trying to find some sort of official website or Twitter account that could have updates or indicate whether Petra was going to be open the following day, but no such accounts exist, which is strange for one of the most major tourist locations in the whole of Jordan. But with some time left to kill, we took a slower lap again at the museum, which we'd previously sort of zipped through, and then we got a cab to our accommodation. It was here, what's called Bedouin Discovery, in the smaller settlement of Sayun, which is detached from Wadi Musa by about a mile and overlooks Petra from the north. It had been described as a simple accommodation, but with a chance to stay in an authentic Bedouin house and experience the culture. Now, I took this with a pretty hefty sack of salt, but apart from being inexpensive, it just genuinely seemed like a more interesting place than just a generic apartment. So we dropped our bags, I quickly jogged out with my camera just in time to catch the sunset and a few shots of the spectacular rocks in the valley. It was a nice moment to myself. Looking out at the gorgeously eroded landscapes, I was thinking about the biblical accounts, some of which would have taken place here in this landscape. Wadi Musa actually translates to Valley of Moses, which is hard to confirm without the material evidence in the area. However, we do know that this area was part of the kingdom of the Moabites, and they get name dropped all over the Old Testament. So, I don't know, it's just running through my mind as the sun went down. Back to the accommodation, this was our host, Musa. He was very amicable and made a point of how much he wanted to extend hospitality. So we hung out for a while in the evening while Musa and a friend of his chatted and smoked. We talked about life in Jordan and life in the UK and what monthly wages look like and the problem of trying to get a house, all things like that. Musa shared that he'd been born in one of the caves in the valley in the 90s, but the Jordanian government had cleared out the Bedouin residents that still lived in the caves in the valley about the time that Petra was really taking off with tourism. These apartments were built on the hills above for the displaced residents. We had a traditional home-cooked meal, which was nice. The accommodation was was okay. A few places could have used a bit of maintenance, but when you go to a country, you might see the main monuments, but you still don't really have a notion of what it's like to live there day to day. And from talking to Musa and staying in the town, I feel like I have at least some notion of what it's like for everyday Jordanian residents in a culture which is notably different from the UK, so I'm glad to have that opportunity. We still weren't sure whether Petra was going to be open the following day. The winds were loudly battering our windows. Musa seemed pretty confident that we'd be able to get in. He's one of the many locals who work in various capacities in the Petra site. He suggested that we might want to take a back route early to a monastery, and that seemed like our best chance. So we set our alarms for 6:30 and we went to bed. So, I don't know your experience of donkeys. In the UK, they're about as docile as you can get. You only ever see them at kitsch beachfronts giving rides for kids. But have you ever heard the noise they make if they get into a fight? I mean, I didn't actually get a field recording of this during the night, but using audio I'd already got from the daytime, I've recreated it for you. It was as if the Nazgul had made an air raid siren. And they enacted these little pieces of public theatre with the stray dogs genuinely about every hour all through the night. So we did not have a good night's sleep. I woke up again when I heard the front door go. In came Musa and said it was time to go. I checked my phone. 5:30. This was a full hour earlier than planned. Musa said something in passing about the government possibly closing the route. Anyway, we got outside and bumped along in a 4x4. After only a few minutes, we got out again to complete the rest on foot. This is an actual entrance to Petra. It's signposted and it's got a maintained track and everything like that, but it's somewhat less known and less used. You pretty much need a lift to get you to the trailhead. Now, this plan isn't as strange as it sounds. The site of Petra does officially open at 6 in the morning, but no huge surprise. Way out at this back entrance, miles out of the way, the morning after a storm, yeah, this ticket tourist police booth thing was not manned. So now we're breaking it, and that's a good start. So then our alarms went off, so this is the time we would have just been getting up. Anyway, even though there are signs, it'd be easy to miss the beginning of the cliff trail. So Musa got us to the start and then left us to it. It's a well enough maintained footpath, so don't worry about having to free climb any of it. Having properly woken up now, I've started to take in the spectacular landscapes dropping off to our right. Annoyingly, the light wasn't quite right for the footage to really sell it, but hey, it was a pretty unique morning. It was about an hour of walking from the trailhead with some stairs, but nothing a healthy adult couldn't handle pretty easily. We passed what looked like souvenir stalls, but they'd been battered by the winds overnight. And eventually, as the sun was a little higher in the sky, we rounded one more corner, and all of a sudden, there it was. Now, quick explanation. I'm actually embarrassed to say I had not clocked this place existed at all until Musa brought it up. I had seen pictures of it, but I just confused it with the treasury and conflated the two. So it's kind of weird to think I came really close to missing this completely. This is the Monastery of Ad-Dir, though, yeah, if you're thinking what I was thinking, the dating of monumental Nabatean architecture was earlier than even the spread of Christianity and a couple of centuries too early for the emergence of a monastic tradition. So yeah, it definitely wasn't a monastery, at least not to begin with. But not that anyone's fussed about that. On the approaching, we were mobbed by two excited puppies, and better yet, there was a coffee stand opposite the facade, and it was just opening as people were moving chairs into place and getting cleared up after the storm. So there we were, sun streaming down, Turkish coffee, and cuddling puppies. Look, I know you're not supposed to be petting stray dogs in other countries, but give me a break. You'd have to be a monster not to give these guys some love and attention. I mean, a more perfect morning you could not possibly design. I was appreciating it very much at the time, but looking back at it now, it almost seems unreal. Also, if you're not aware, some collect fridge magnets, some collect postcards, some collect pebbles. I collect vanity shots of espressos I've had in ludicrously beautiful places. And this one is gonna take some beating. So yeah, so grateful to have that moment to remember. And it was all sponsored by Hyundai. We couldn't stay all morning, as I wanted to catch Petra in the sunshine if at all possible, so we started off down the trail to the main valley. Our path was blocked by more smashed souvenir stands, and we were greeted by this huge bulge.
That is water. I should probably stop doing that.
Gradually, as we descended the steps, we encountered one or two people, so it seemed like Petra was open as normal, which was a relief. It turned out that Musa's tip had been a very good one. So for most people, if you're coming in from the main entrance via the Seek and then the Treasury, you'd be attacking these 800 steps head on. And this sort of explained all the vendors offering horse or donkey rides. I really hadn't grasped the point before when we'd just been walking on the floor of the valley, but seeing the gradient, yeah, I could now see why it would be a tempting option. Suffice to say, I think we've done well coming across the back footpath, as it was a much more gentle incline. So if you are able to get a lift to the beginning of the monastery path, I'd really recommend this, but kind of more as like a 2-day itinerary. You will need a Petra ticket, remember, so this wouldn't be a good place to start your entire visit. Soon we were back down to the valley floor, but it could not have looked more different the previous day. We also had a chance to see the Temple of Duchères up close. I mean, considering it's a freestanding structure, it's amazing it's still standing at its height 2,000 years later. We also had a chance to walk around the terrace of the Great Temple. I'd made the mistake of thinking this was a later Roman addition to the site, but there's my inherent Eurocentric bias at work. Even though the Romans did add their architecture to the area, such as this, the Temenus Gate, the Great Temple structure is Nabatean, whatever it might look like. We headed back from the valley to see the royal tombs up close. I hadn't really appreciated these properly the previous day in the gloom, but I was really now taking in the sheer scale of them. Without going into a full breakdown of which is which, I'm just going to let you enjoy the footage.
Petra really is a remarkable place. What really struck me, while Petra contains some of the most incredible human artistry you can find anywhere, this place was already a work of art, even before the first chisel ever touched the rock face. The contours, the contrasts, the breathtaking array of colours and textures, the very stone of this valley is alive with vibrance and beauty. By this point, we were actually having to rush it a bit because we had to meet up with Yusef and get back on the road. I took a last look at the treasury in the sunlight before we retraced our steps back through the Sikh. We also got a better look at the obelisk tomb and some of the djinn blocks at the entrance of the trail, but we couldn't stay long. There's a lot more places we had yet to see in Jordan, but we can never cram enough into these videos before they become too long for people to even bother clicking on them in the first place, so we need to start wrapping up. But a few final thoughts on Petra. So I was surprised at how many places like souvenir stalls and food stands were in the main site. The souvenir stands particularly felt just like an act of littering. There were just these horrible, raggy piles of stuff. I mean, I'm not against people selling souvenirs. If they'd set their stalls up to like blend with the fabric of the site, like maybe, I don't know, like historical tents, for example, that would have been preferable, but that's probably too much to ask. It's not really clear what allows you to run a business in Petra. The one thing you want to avoid, and we'd already encountered plenty of anecdotes about people experiencing this before arriving, whatever you do, do not accept any offers of horse, donkey, camel or carriage rides, and my goodness, you'll be offered frequently. Sorry if it feels like I'm beating a dead horse with this again. Poor choice of metaphor. This is not even primarily about cruelty, though in the past that has been rampant. Petra did a special on it, possibly attracted by a site with such similar initials. But even though Jordanian authorities have attempted to improve standards since 2018, it's just that you're extremely likely to get ripped off, intimidated, or just generally backed into a corner by various men trying to offer you rides. They are liable to straight up lie about costs, implying or just saying it's free, and then charging you once you arrive at a place with a group of their mates all assembled. Just save yourself the trouble. I really hesitate to encourage anyone to be discourteous when they're in another country, but in this case, you will be harangued repeatedly and vigorously. You just need to resolve to ignore, be firm, or even blunt. I mean, as Brits, this feels very uncomfortable, almost rude, but trying to be cordial and all English about it just really isn't an option. But look, those two negatives aside, I mean, do I really need to encourage you anymore? I was ecstatic to have made it here, and after all the worrying of nearly missing out on it and whether we'd be able to get back in, I was just flooded with relief and enjoying the beautiful sunshine. It wasn't to last though. Not only did it start raining that afternoon just as we were getting on our way, but just 24 hours after we left the Petra site, it would shut completely and not reopen. So in the next episode, we've got a story to finish as we head to the capital of Jordan and things go downhill quickly. Next episode, we're going to Amman. Meanwhile, if you've been enjoying the music in the background, well, thanks. You should hear what it sounds like when it isn't being talked over and interrupted by silly audio gags. But you can find the EP at Bandcamp, and downloading it is the best way you can support us at the channel. See you again very soon.